The snow was falling sideways that morning, cutting across the pines like a million glass needles. Clara's boots sank deep into the white silence as she pulled her suitcase toward the cabin, a crooked silhouette against the storm, half buried, half forgotten. The year was 1933 and she'd come here to vanish. No radio, no phone, no eyes to judge the choices she'd made. Only the echo of wind through the boarded windows, whispering her name as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled of dust, pine resin and something older, like pages that remembered too much. The floor groaned beneath her weight. Her lantern threw trembling circles across the walls, revealing a table, a broken clock, and a trunk with a rusted lock. She hesitated before opening it, her breath fogging in the cold. Inside were folded quilts, a chipped teacup, and at the bottom, a leather-bound diary, edges blackened by time. Her fingers trembled as she brushed off the frost and saw a name, written inside, her own last name. Clara froze. The handwriting was delicate, looping, unmistakably feminine. She turned a page. The ink bled like veins beneath skin, telling of a woman who'd lived here before, who'd heard voices in the wind and spoken of something buried under the floorboards. Each word pulled at her, a whisper growing louder. The storm outside howled in answer, shaking the roof until snow drifted through the cracks. She looked toward the floorboards the diary mentioned, where the lantern's light flickered like a pulse. The clock on the table ticked once, just once, and stopped. In that breathless silence, Clara realized she wasn't alone. The wind wasn't just wind. It was breathing. The winter Clara left Chicago, the world had already stopped making sense. The newspapers spoke only of hunger, of banks collapsing, of men in hats staring at empty pockets. Her own life had collapsed too, her husband gone with the last of their savings, and the woman who'd called herself her friend. The scandal had chewed her name until nothing remained but whispers. That's why she answered an ad no one else would. Cabin for sale, remote, must collect in person. It felt like an invitation from the void itself. She told herself she was searching for peace, but it was really punishment she wanted, silence sharp enough to erase her. Each mile away from the city stripped another layer of noise. By the time she reached the hills of Montana, she'd forgotten the sound of laughter. She remembered only his voice the night he left, saying she was too soft for survival. That softness had hardened into resolve, though even that cracked when she saw the cabin. Sagging roof, shattered porch, the smell of forgotten winters. Her first night, the temperature dropped below zero. She slept wrapped in her coat, listening to the fire hiss like it disapproved of her. She thought of the diary resting on the table, unopened since that stormy arrival. It called to her in the quiet, promising answers she didn't want but couldn't resist. What kind of woman shared her name and lived in this same solitude a lifetime before? The coincidence gnawed at her like hunger. Morning came grey and brittle. Clara brewed coffee thick as tar and watched the forest through the window, each branch glazed in ice, each shadow too still. A crow landed on the fence and tilted its head toward the cabin, as if waiting. That's when she noticed the faint mark carved on the doorframe, 3 circles, overlapping, burned into the wood. She didn't remember seeing it before, and when she touched it, the fire in the hearth flared as though the house had inhaled. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind moaned around the cabin, a hollow voice threading through the cracks. She rose, wrapped herself in a wool blanket, and lit the lantern again. The diary waited on the table, its leather surface cold, its edges curled like lips about to speak. She opened to the first page where the ink had faded, to brown, the year written in careful script, 1898. Beneath it, one sentence. The voices have started again beneath the floor. Clara felt the air tighten around her shoulders. She read on. The author, E. Harland, had been a widow, living alone after her husband vanished in the mines nearby. Each entry trembled with loneliness and fear. The woman wrote of footsteps at night, of whispers calling her name from beneath the boards, of dreams where she saw her reflection moving out of sync. The last entry ended abruptly. Tomorrow I will open the hatch. There was no page after that. The rest of the diary was blank, as though the story had stopped mid-breath. Clara stared at the wood under her feet. She set the lantern on the floor and knelt. The boards were scarred with age, nail heads rusted deep. She tapped one. The sound was hollow. Another, solid. Then, near the fireplace, she found it. A small square, cut into the planks, edges almost invisible beneath decades of dust. She scraped at it until her fingernails bled. A faint metallic clink echoed from below, like something answering her. She froze. The fire hissed again, taller now, though she hadn't fed it. She should have stopped. She told herself she would. But curiosity and fear had already entwined, indistinguishable. She pried the board loose and revealed darkness, cold and breathing. A draught climbed from below, carrying the scent of damp stone and iron. Her lantern light caught on something. A hinge, maybe. Or a chain. She reached out, trembling, when the knock came. 3 slow knocks on the door. Not from the wind, not from outside, from the inside of the wall. Clara stumbled backward, the lantern swinging wildly, spilling light across the walls. The knocking had stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse, dense, waiting. She pressed her ear to the wooden panel where the sound had come from. Nothing. Only the creak of the house shifting under the weight of the wind. Then softly, a breath. It came from inside the wall, long and deliberate, as though someone or something was mimicking her own. She staggered away, heart pounding like the storm outside had entered her chest. She tried to reason with herself. Old wood, trapped air, the house settling. But then she saw it. Frost blooming along the seams of the floorboards she had lifted. The temperature plunged, the lantern flame shrinking to a shiver. The diary lay open on the table, pages turning on their own. Her name, her exact name, appeared scrawled across a blank page in wet ink. She hadn't written it. No one had. The pen beside it rolled slowly, stopping with its nib pointing toward her. Clara's breath came out in clouds. The next morning, sunlight returned, weak and pale, though nothing felt clean about it. She searched the cabin for signs of an intruder. No footprints, no broken locks, nothing missing. But behind the door, carved faintly into the wood, she found the same symbol she'd seen on the frame. 3 overlapping circles. Only this one had been burned fresh, the edges still black. It hadn't been there last night. The smell of smoke lingered, as if whoever or whatever had marked it was still near. She left the cabin for the first time since arriving, trudging through the snow toward the nearest town, 15 miles away. The wind cut her face. The cold gnawed her fingers numb. At the general store, she asked the old clerk if he knew anyone named E. Harland. The man's eyes changed. He didn't answer, just reached under the counter and set down a faded photograph. The same cabin, same doorframe, same 3 circles, and beside it, Clara herself, or someone who looked exactly like her. The clerk whispered, "That's from 35 years ago." Clara's throat closed. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow and deliberate, as though the mountain had heard her name. Clara carried the photograph back to the cabin inside her coat, as if hiding proof of something impossible. The image felt warm against her chest, though the air around her had turned colder with each step. The trees leaned inward, branches whispering above her like voices sharing a secret she wasn't meant to hear. When she reached the porch, the door was slightly open. She remembered locking it before leaving. Inside, the fire had gone out, yet the air smelled faintly of smoke, and the diary rested open again, on a different page. She read the new entry aloud, her voice trembling. "The man from town warned me not to return," said the mountain remembers faces. "But I can't leave. The voices are closer now. They said they know my name." Clara's pulse quickened. She turned the photograph over. On its back, faint pencil handwriting read, "Don't dig beneath the hearth." Her eyes lifted toward the fireplace. The hatch she had found was only a few feet away. The shadows there seemed thicker now, shaped like breath held too long. Determined to understand, Clara visited the town's library the next day, where the librarian, a woman with silver hair and hollow eyes, brought her a ledger from the last century. "Harland," Clara whispered, flipping through yellowed pages. There it was. Eliza Harland, pronounced dead in 1898. No body recovered. The entry ended with a note in red ink. Property sealed under state order. But the clerk had sold it to her just months ago. Someone had broken that seal. Someone had wanted her there. As she drove her borrowed truck back through the snow, the mountain road seemed narrower than before. The sky pressed low, grey and heavy, and in her rearview mirror she swore she saw another vehicle trailing her, a black carriage shape that vanished whenever she blinked. The wind carried whispers again, words almost forming sentences, always just beyond hearing. Back inside the cabin, she unfolded the photograph once more. The woman who looked like her had something clutched in her hand, a small metallic key glinting near her waist. Clara looked down, at the floor. The loose board she'd lifted had something wedged beneath it, barely visible. She reached for it and froze. The same key was there, waiting. The key was small, brass and cold enough to sting her palm. It didn't fit the hatch beneath the floor. It was older, ornate. Its teeth shaped like a symbol she'd seen before, 3 overlapping circles. She wrapped it in a cloth and set it on the table beside the diary. That's when she saw new writing bleeding across the last blank page. Words, appearing slowly, letter by letter, as if written by invisible hands. Before the next full moon she will return what was taken. Clara stared at it, heart hammering. The next full moon was in 7 days. The sense of time warped around her. Daylight barely lingered. Nights stretched too long. Each tick of the broken clock on the mantel echoed through her bones. She tried marking days on the wall, but the scratches vanished by morning. The house seemed to breathe with her, creaking when she moved, sighing when she slept. On the 3rd night she woke to the sound of footsteps pacing overhead. Impossible, since the cabin had no attic. The pacing stopped only when she whispered, "Who are you?" Silence answered, heavy as snow. She found herself counting the hours by the moon's phases, the silver disk climbing higher, fuller each night. The forest outside felt alive, every rustle timed like a warning. Once, she saw lights between the trees, pale orbs hovering, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She told herself they were lanterns, reflections, tricks of the storm. But one night, one drifted close enough to the window that she saw what was inside it, a woman's face, weeping, mouthing words she couldn't hear. Clara fell to her knees, pressing her hands to her ears, but the whisper still found her. Return it. By the 5th night, her resolve cracked. The diary glowed faintly under moonlight, its pages fluttering like wings. The key on the table rattled against the wood. She wanted to flee, to burn the cabin, to bury the key, to forget this place existed. But the door refused to open. Frost sealed it shut from the outside. She was trapped with whatever counted those 7 days, and somewhere deep below the floorboards, something started to knock again, 3 times, slower now, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. By the 6th day, Clara's world had shrunk to the circle of lamplight around her. Sleep came only in fragments, haunted by the sound of dripping water that she could never find. When she woke one morning, the diary was gone. The table was bare except for the key and a smear of ash shaped like a handprint. She tore through every corner of the cabin, under the bed, inside drawers, even outside in the snow, but there was no trace. The loss felt like a nerve torn out. The silence that followed was worse than any whisper. Desperate, she searched the walls again and discovered something she had missed before. A narrow door behind the cupboard, nailed shut with blackened iron. The nails were old, eaten by rust, but one had been pried loose recently. The wood smelled of earth and metal, as if the forest itself had tried to seal it. She fetched a hammer, her breath trembling. The first strike echoed too loudly. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash from an invisible fire. On the second strike she heard movement on the other side. Not echo, reply. She dropped the hammer and stumbled back. The sound came again, slower now, dragging, scraping, closer, her. Lantern dimmed to a thin thread of light. Then, from beneath the door, a sliver of something slid through. Paper, folded tight, damp with frost. She hesitated before picking it up. The handwriting was hers, but she had never written these words. You opened it too early. Now she's awake. Her knees gave way, and she fell against the wall, staring at the key that had begun to hum softly on the table. That night, the storm returned, angrier than before. The wind slammed against the shutters as though demanding entry. The fireplace roared without fuel, flames bending toward her instead of upward. In the glow, she saw a shadow moving independently of her body, taller, slower, its head turning toward the nailed door. She screamed, but the sound came out strangled, stolen. The fire dimmed. When she woke hours later, the storm was gone, but the door behind the cupboard stood open, nails scattered on the floor like teeth. The air beyond the open door was colder than the outside storm had ever been. Clara held her lantern forward, its flame shivering, revealing stairs spiraling into darkness. The smell hit her first, wet stone, iron, and something faintly sweet, like decay disguised as perfume. She descended one step, then another. Each creak of wood sounded like it carried through time itself. Her shadow stretched along the wall, distorted, ahead of her, moving before she did. At the bottom, her foot met earth, and she found herself in a chamber carved from the rock itself, lined with shelves filled with glass jars. Inside each jar floated something pale and human-shaped, fingers, locks of hair, teeth suspended in yellowing liquid. A table sat at the center, covered in notebooks identical to the diary she'd lost. Each bore the same initials, E.H. She opened one, blank, another, blank, but when her lantern passed over the last, the pages filled suddenly, letters racing across like veins, spreading through skin. She read the first line aloud. "The one who shares my name will finish what I could not." Clara's knees weakened. The floor shuddered once and dust fell from the ceiling like rain. She realized the chamber wasn't underground by accident. It was a tomb. Her tomb, or hers to become. Aproveita e conta de onde você está ouvindo, cidade e país, e deixa o seu gostei para essa história continuar chegando a mais gente. Because Clara would have wanted someone, anyone, to hear her before the silence claimed her. She turned toward the sound, a soft heartbeat, echoing. From the far wall, her lantern light landed on something carved deep into the stone, 3 circles intertwined, the same mark from the cabin door. Beneath it, an opening barely wide enough to crawl through, exhaled a breath of frozen air. She knelt, holding the key tight. The humming grew louder, vibrating against her palm. She inserted it into the carved symbol. The rock itself responded, grinding open like a jaw unhinging. Inside was a mirror, old, fogged, framed in iron. But when she wiped the glass clean, it didn't show her reflection. It showed Eliza Harlan standing behind her, smiling. And when Clara turned, no one was there. Only the mirror, whispering her name again and again. Clara stumbled back from the mirror, her lantern clattering against the stone floor and shattering into flame. The fire spilled across the ground like liquid light, catching the jars, the notebooks, the air itself. She turned and ran up the stairs, her boots slipping on the icy steps. Behind her, the mirror screamed, a sound like glass being torn apart and voices crying through it. The cabin above shook, the boards straining as if the earth were trying to swallow it whole. She reached the top just as the fire roared up the tunnel after her. Outside, the night was blinding white. Snow fell in spirals, heavy and fast, erasing every trace of the path that had brought her here. She staggered toward the tree line, choking on the smoke that followed. But the forest offered no escape. The branches closed, around her like ribs, and the light behind her didn't fade. It followed. Each flicker between the trees showed glimpses of faces she didn't know, women whose eyes burned like lanterns, whispering her name. Clara, return it. She pressed the key to her chest, screaming into the wind. I don't know what you want. The mountain answered with thunder. She kept running until her legs gave out. The snow beneath her glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heart. When she looked up, she saw the cabin, again through the storm. It was impossible, she'd run miles downhill. But there it stood, closer than ever, light burning in its windows like eyes. The house wasn't waiting for her. It was following her. Every direction she turned, it stood there. Every step she took, it creaked closer. Finally exhausted, she fell to her knees. The key burned hot against her palm, branding her skin with its pattern of circles. The wind hushed. For the first time in hours, there was silence. Then, from within, that quiet came a whisper. Not from the house, not from the woods, but from inside her own head. You've already escaped once. Clara opened her eyes to find herself back inside the cabin, standing before the mirror again, snow dripping from her hair onto the wooden floor that was no longer burning. Clara's breath came in ragged clouds as she stared at her own reflection, or what she thought was her reflection. The woman in the mirror blinked a heartbeat too late, smiled when Clara didn't, and lifted, her hand first. On the other side of the glass, the cabin looked older, darker, the walls streaked with soot. Clara whispered, "Who are you?" The other mouth moved, shaping the same words, but with a voice that came from behind her. She spun, but there was only the empty room and the echo of her question looping through it like a curse. She knew then that leaving wasn't enough. The thing had found her through blood, through name, through time itself. She tore open the floorboards again, desperate, to bury the key, to end the chain. But the hole below wasn't the hatch anymore. It was the chamber she had just fled, waiting, patient. The stairs led downward into endless shadow, and from below came the faint, rhythmic tapping of metal against stone. The same sound she'd heard her first night, the same sound Eliza must have heard before she vanished. It was calling her back to finish what had begun. She clutched the diary, no, another copy, newly appeared on the table, and saw her handwriting, racing across the pages in real time. She descended once more for the last time. Every letter wrote itself as she read it. Her throat closed. The ink smelled of iron and smoke, and the last sentence wasn't written yet. She realized she was writing it now, just by standing there. The story wouldn't end until she reached the bottom again. The walls of the cabin started to pulse like lungs drawing breath. Snow poured through the chimney, swirling in mid-air without melting. Clara stepped toward the open hatch, the cold rising to meet her. Her lantern reignited on its own, flame blue, steady, waiting. She paused at the threshold, one foot on the stair, the other still in the world she could leave behind. Then the mirror whispered, soft as a lullaby, "You cannot return until she sleeps." Clara tightened her grip on the key, knowing that whatever waited below wasn't just Eliza. It was herself, forgotten, unfinished, waiting to be buried again. And still, she stepped down. The air grew, colder with every step she took. The deeper Clara descended, the clearer the sounds became. Soft whispers layered atop one another, voices overlapping in a chant she couldn't understand. Her lantern flickered, struggling against the darkness, revealing faint shapes carved into the stone walls. Faces, hundreds of them. Some wept, some screamed, some stared at her with hollow eyes. When she reached the bottom, the chamber had changed. The shelves were gone. The floor was bare stone, and in the center lay a circle carved deep into the ground, filled with melted wax and something darker that shimmered like oil. Clara knew she couldn't destroy what she didn't understand, but she also knew she had no choice. The diary pulsed in her hand, its pages trembling as if alive. She knelt beside the circle and opened it to the final entry. Blank again, waiting. The key, still warm from her touch, began to hum louder, a vibration crawling up her arm to her shoulder. She whispered to herself, "If this ends me, then let it end everything." Then she drove the key into the center of the carved symbol. The stone cracked. A gust of freezing air blasted upward, extinguishing her light. In that darkness, she heard Eliza's voice clearly for the first time. "She took what was mine. You carry it now," the voice said, low and sorrowful. "The key opens the heart, not the lock." Clara's fingers trembled. "What heart?" she whispered. The chamber responded by beating, slow, deep, from beneath the floor. The rhythm matched her pulse until she couldn't tell which was hers. Then the cracks in the stone widened, revealing beneath them the outline of something buried, something moving. She fell backward, clutching the diary, as words began to carve themselves onto its pages in blood-red ink. She read aloud through tears, "The curse binds through memory. The one who forgets becomes the other." The chamber shook. She realized what it meant. Eliza hadn't died. She'd been replaced. Each woman who found, this place became the next. The key wasn't an artifact, it was a handoff, a trap disguised as inheritance, and now Clara was part of it. She looked up toward the stairs, the only escape, but the entrance had sealed shut, stone fusing where wood had been. Her only chance was to break the circle entirely, even if it meant burning the house above and herself with it. She tore the diary's pages free, scattering them across the floor like feathers, and raised her lantern once more. The flame turned, white. Somewhere far above, the clock in the cabin began to tick again, and the voice of Eliza whispered through the rising wind, "If you burn it, you burn both of us." The chamber convulsed as the air turned molten cold. Clara's lantern flared so bright it painted her shadow onto every wall at once. The faces carved into the stone began to move, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes shifting toward her. The ground beneath her pulsed faster, beating like a living thing. She could feel it in her bones, the mountain itself breathing with her fear. In the circle's center, the crack widened until something inside began to rise, white fingers clawing through the gap, attached to a body made of ash and memory. Eliza Harland, or what was left of her. The apparition stepped forward, half transparent, her hair flowing like smoke, her face a fractured echo of Clara's. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, voice layered with centuries of others. "You shouldn't have remembered." Clara backed, away, gripping the lantern like a weapon. "You called me here," she said. "You wrote my name." Eliza smiled, the expression twisting wrong. "Names are how the curse finds you. I was the first to read it. You'll be the last." Then she lunged. The light shattered. Clara fell to the floor, groping through darkness, her hands finding the diary, its pages aflame but unburned. She screamed and hurled it into the circle, the pages bursting upward like wings of fire, the chamber filled with a sound like hundreds of voices gasping at once. Eliza froze mid-motion, the firelight illuminating her hollow eyes. "You can't end what's written," she hissed. Clara stepped closer, holding the key out before her, its glow cutting through the dark, like dawn through fog. "Then I'll rewrite it." She plunged the key into the diary's spine. A blast of white light erupted, lifting her off the ground. Every face on the walls screamed, then melted into dust. The chamber quaked, the ceiling cracking open to reveal a tunnel of snow and stars. Clara floated amid the blinding radiance, feeling her heartbeat slow, then match the earth's pulse one last time. The light poured into her chest, searing through her veins, rewriting something deep inside. When the silence returned, the chamber was gone. The fire had vanished. Clara stood in the cabin again, the key cold in her palm, the diary gone, the walls untouched. Outside, the dawn had come, pink and gold. For the first time in 7 days, the wind didn't whisper her name. But the mirror still stood in the corner, its surface cracked, and in one fractured piece another Clara smiled back. Morning arrived like a stranger that didn't belong there. The cabin no longer creaked, no longer breathed. Its silence was too complete. Clara stood barefoot on the wooden floor, her clothes torn, her skin marked with faint circular burns where the key had rested. The snow outside glittered like shards of broken glass, the forest utterly still. She stepped towards it, the door half expecting it to resist, but the handle turned easily. When she opened it, sunlight hit her face for the first time since she'd arrived, warm and real. For a heartbeat, she believed it was over. She walked into the clearing, the cold biting softly at her ankles. The mountain seemed calm now, its peak veiled in soft mist. The wind carried no voices, no whispers, only the faint sound of melting ice dripping from the pines. Clara knelt in the snow and buried the key, pressing the earth over it until her fingers went numb. "It ends here," she whispered, watching her breath fade into nothing. But as she stood, she noticed something strange. The frost on the ground had melted in the shape of 3 circles, perfectly overlapping. The mountain, it seemed, had heard her words and marked them. Returning to the cabin, she found the mirror cracked beyond recognition, shards scattered across the floor like fallen stars. She gathered one fragment, turning it in her hand, and saw only her reflection, tired, alive, free. But when she turned it slightly, the reflection lingered a second too long before moving. Her heart lurched. "No," she whispered, setting the shard down carefully. She refused to look again. Instead, she packed her bag, took her coat, and stepped toward the door. But the sound of the clock stopped her. Tick, tick, tick. The same broken clock that hadn't moved since the first night now ticked steadily. Its hands pointed to midnight. She stared at it for a long time, the unease crawling up her spine. The air inside the cabin had shifted again. Too still, too watchful. A faint rustle came from beneath the floorboards, a soft sigh like someone turning in their sleep. Clara backed away slowly, refusing to breathe, refusing to listen. Then the whisper came again, soft as snow falling. "You rewrote it wrong." The clock stopped. The mirror fragment trembled on the floor and turned by itself, reflecting not Clara, but another pair of eyes, Eliza's, blinking. Once, then smiling, Clara left the cabin before the next dusk, walking through the thinning snow until her legs ached, and the tree line disappeared behind her. The mountain loomed at her back, silent and patient, as if watching her go. Every step away felt like wading through the remnants of someone else's dream. The air grew warmer, the scent of pine giving way to wet soil and thawing earth. She didn't know where the road led, only that she had to keep moving, to stay ahead of the echo that seemed to follow her name like a shadow too long to outrun. She reached the edge of a river frozen in patches, where the water whispered against the ice. There she stopped and stared at her reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, but alive. The woman in the water blinked in rhythm with her this time. No delay, no deceit. Clara exhaled shakily and dipped her fingers into the current. The burn marks on her palm had faded to pale scars shaped like 3 rings. She realized they no longer hurt. They pulsed. Instead, gentle, rhythmic, alive but hers now, not borrowed. The curse had changed form, or maybe she had. She found an abandoned church miles later, its windows shattered, its bell half buried in snow. Inside, she built a small fire from pew wood and laid her last possession, the photograph, beside it. The faces in it had faded, but the outline of the cabin remained, faint as memory. She whispered, "It's over," and fed the picture to the flame. For a moment she thought she heard laughter, light, familiar, not cruel. The smoke rose through the roof and vanished into the sky. It didn't whisper this time. It simply left. By morning, Clara had no voice left to speak. She followed the dirt road until she saw a small town appear between the hills, roofs shining under the weak sun. The people who saw her passing nodded politely, unaware that a woman had walked out of a story that shouldn't have existed. She smiled back, a real smile, small but true. The world felt heavier, but she did. Too anchored, awake. Behind her the mountain was still visible, its peak shrouded in morning light, and if one looked closely, they might see a thin line of smoke rising from where the cabin once stood, spiraling upward like an unspoken promise, fading but never gone. Years later, travelers passing through the Montana Valley would speak of a clearing where the snow never settled. They said the ground there was warm, that sometimes you could hear faint knocking under the earth when the moon was full. Most avoided it. A few didn't. Among the few was a young woman who came searching for her grandmother's name, Harland, drawn by a story older than her memory. When she arrived, she found only wildflowers and the faint scent of smoke, and in the center of the clearing, half buried in frost, lay a key with 3 circles etched upon it. Clara had disappeared long before then. Some claimed she left the country. Others said she'd been seen teaching in a small town by the river, her hands always wrapped in gloves no matter the season. Those who spoke to her described her as kind but distant, as if part of her lived elsewhere. Sometimes, when thunder rolled across the mountains, she would pause and close her eyes, listening, not afraid, only remembering. She never spoke of the cabin or the diary or the woman who shared her face. She carried the silence like an heirloom. But one night, many winters later, Clara returned to the valley. She stood where the cabin once stood, the snow falling, soft and slow, and placed a single lantern on the ground. Its light was small but steady, cutting through the dark like a heartbeat. She whispered a name, not hers, not Eliza's, but something between them. The wind answered, gentle this time, carrying her words away. And as the lantern flame flickered out, the mountain exhaled one last time, peaceful. The echoes had finally quieted. All that remained was the faint imprint of 3 circles, glowing faintly beneath the snow, like a seal, like forgiveness, like the end of a story finally allowed to rest. The mountain slept, and so did its ghosts, and somewhere far below, the clock that had once stopped began to tick again, steady, patient, eternal. If you felt this story reach you in the quiet, maybe it was meant to. Subscribe and stay close, because some stories don't end, they just wait to be heard again.